One of the big changes that perhaps might happen in America or might not happen is on guns. We saw the murder of Dante Wright, or the killing of Dante Wright, the killing of Adam Toledo. And even since, so many more. In fact, whilst the George Floyd victory, for want of a better term, whilst we're hearing about that, there was another police shooting, as it were. Now, of course, from the UK looking at the US, we've often pontificated. Why do they have guns? Why not just why don't have only special forces? Specially trained units of the police force. Why not only have them have guns? Issue, of course, is guns are commonplace in America. Doesn't mean anyone can get them, but they're definitely available, and folks do have them, and enshrined in the Second Amendment is this legal right to bear arms, which a lot of Americans, including a lot of the guests we have on today, have acted on that and have guns. And so this idea of will there ever be change is something that's been debated for years, and I don't want us to think in this one stream we can somehow solve these issues. But what would be interesting to consider is, what some of the arguments are for owning guns and what some of the arguments are for not holding guns. And also, can we actually have legislative change in America? After all these shootings, these accidental shootings, I thought it was a taser, I thought it was a whatever it is. After all the mass shootings that we see, America leads the world when it comes to mass shootings. What's going to happen? How are things going to change? So that's the debate today. If you listen to this, you think this is interesting, share this stream with somebody, folks. Just hit the share button, put it onto Twitter, let people know you're watching this, because I want to get lots of perspectives on this, and start commenting. I want to hear your thoughts. Let's just jump straight to America. Let's bring in our American correspondent, Siobhan. Siobhan, guns, what are your thoughts? I think there's a bit of a delay. We can't quite see you, Siobhan. That is quite anticlimactic. We'll come back to Siobhan when we can. Let's jump then to a guest we're bringing on today, George, who's the host of the Rights and Wrongs podcast. He's originally from Boston, Massachusetts. Masters on human rights and international politics, an undergraduate degree from University of Glasgow. So he spent his time in the UK. In criminal justice and sociology. He's done a tour in Afghanistan, was an active duty with the US Marines, and also as a licensed gun owner in the states of Massachusetts. So, George, what are your thoughts on guns? I know we may disagree, but what are your thoughts?
So I agree, because it's a very complicated conversation when it comes to guns. Because like I said, I'm a gun owner, but the difference is that I come from one of the few states that requires you to have a license. You have to get trained, and you actually have to show your ID, show a PIN to actually buy a gun. I'm one of the few states you don't have a 2-week background check, but that's because we have a 6-month background check to get the license, where you sit across from the police chief. And the police chief at any second time can go, like, you're not getting a gun. And at that point, it's like, you're just not getting one, period. Other states, it's a little bit easier. It gets but the conversation gets very complicated, as you said, because one, it's a state-to-state issue. One, it's not like I lived in the UK for 2 years, like you said. Never felt like I needed a firearm. I had a gun for over a year, carried it on me maybe twice because I had a concealed carry license, so I could carry it under my jacket, in my pants. Massachusetts, you can't open carry because, personally, I think it's stupid, because that's a show of power, and also a lot of people even say that takes away your choice, because I prefer to handle things through vocal issues. If it comes to that issue, I'd rather get into fisticuffs with someone than ever pull out a gun. Gun for me is a last resort. I would never want to.
So let's jump in straight there, because you've said something interesting. So are you saying then the reason you have guns is because is because there are guns everywhere, so you need it for protection? Or is it more this kind of First Amendment idea that, or Second Amendment, idea that it's part of your human right as an American to wield a firearm?
Well, actually, no, you hit a really good point. It actually, to a lot of people, it is a First Amendment issue. That's the reason why I'm happy Massachusetts is a concealed carry only state. It's illegal to open carry. If you brazen your gun, which means that you show it, you lose your license, because that's seen as a threat. And also, I think it's stupid, because I carry it for defense of myself and others. But the thing is, I don't make myself a target. But the reason I carry it a lot is, I used to work security. It's actually necessary for some security positions, because I used to work for defense contractors, where if you're guarding buildings for the defense company, you probably need a gun, because if someone's going to come in there, they're not going to be, you have that stupid argument that's it's stupid, but it makes sense that criminals don't follow the law, which is true. But the reason, like, I had a gun most of the time. I carried a revolver just because I agree and understand the Massachusetts laws on extended magazines, that you shouldn't have a gun that can shoot 1,000 bullets. But where they draw that line is really weird and curious. But the reason, like, for me, a lot of times I carried one for personal defense because guns are a thing in the United States. But the other reason is I actually just enjoy shooting. Like, that's a weird thing that people don't talk about. It is a recreational activity. Like, you can just go out to the range, shoot. I find it very stress relieving in a lot of ways because it's a very controlling thing. But one thing that I think you guys also didn't talk about a lot is that problem when you talk about the police shootings and guns. Is I've talked about this on my podcast a lot. But the scary thing is that most people in the law enforcement come directly from the U.S. military. And it's a little strange to think about this, that I come from the Marine Corps, which is known as, we're notorious for shoot first, ask questions later. Like, when I pick up my gun, the first thing I do is muscle response, which is called a hammered pair, which is 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. When, like, if I'm going to go into a shooting situation, that's just how my muscle response goes. If I shoot to kill. But then you take people like myself, oh, you have a military background, and you're in the front of the line for law enforcement, bumping in front of people with degrees. Like, I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, but they don't really care so much about that. I get paid more for that. But the reason I get onto the department is my degree. And if I wanted to go from the Marine Corps to the Air Force, I would have to take a psychological evaluation where that's a weird thing. Going from one armed service to another armed service, the Air Force is like, whoa, buddy. Like, you come from the Marine Corps. We need to calm you down, make sure that you're psychologically calm enough to come to another military branch. But police departments are basically, oh yeah, you're a military, you're a vet, you can come straight in here, and even though you're trained to fight, and that's one of the problems. I think that's not talked about a lot. I know a lot of people are going to call me a traitor for saying that, but it's the truth.
But is that not, I'm still struggling to understand this. I think, is it not worse then for people to own guns that have a shoot to kill response than it is people that own guns as a defense mechanism? Or, I'm just, for context, I'm completely against.
So the idea behind that is, this is the problem where it comes to things. I'm guessing neither one of you ever shot a firearm.
No.
So
at least we wouldn't say it on a live stream.
I mean, well, you can go to a shooting range in the UK and use a gun in a specific environment, and they're not the same guns that you would use to kill somebody, but they you can use them for targeted stuff.
So the reason we aim for the reason you do a hammer pair, which is 2 to the chest, 1 to the head, because the second you go to a gun response, the second you pull the gun, you've already decided that you're taking a life, because you should have already gone through you should have an escalation of force. Gun response should be your 20th option, not your first. And I understand in the United States it is becoming the first option. That's one reason I don't like people that open carry, because you're already saying what your first response is, and people are already now scared of you. The reason why you do that with guns is that the conversation that people don't have is that you hand me an M16, which even isn't the best rifle, and you give me a chance to sit down up there, I can shoot a quarter at 500 yards or 500 meters. Every single time. Just give me the time. I can just shoot that. But the problem is my life's not a threat. And also a rifle is a lot more accurate than a handgun. If I'm in a situation where I think you're coming at me and I'm pulling a gun out, most responses going to go, I'm going to pull out and I'm just going to keep pulling the trigger until it goes click, meaning that it's out, because I'm responsive. My body tenses up. And that's the reason why you tell people to aim for center mass. And people say, like, why did they shoot for the arm? Why did they shoot for this? If you can shoot for the hand that someone's holding a gun, one, that means you don't feel threatened because you're in complete control of your senses. So you shouldn't have pulled the trigger, because that means you're not feeling threatened. And two, you're at like a high level world rank shooter that like you should be much better than be in a situation. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but when people make that argument, most of the time people haven't shot that gun, or people that say that they can do it are, it's like those people that think that they're going to go up against LeBron James and shoot threes off them. Like so you're not that level.
I'm happy to hear your perspective. I want to get a couple more in here. So we can get even into this some more. So I want to bring up Siobhan and I want to bring on Hamish together, if that's okay. And just hear some of your perspectives, because Siobhan, you're in America as well. You're not in Alaska, which is where I think you are, George. What are your thoughts on guns, especially based on your state? And obviously, Hamish, you're in London. Things are very different. I'd love to hear your perspectives too. Go, Siobhan.
So I'm in Illinois, where basically having an open carry gun is illegal. So you can't really go ahead and just have your gun willy nilly, just all out and all out, because it's illegal either way. Even if you have a license, you can't do it. I am more of on the side of, why does somebody need an AK-14 for stress relief? I don't get it. Since it is an American right, I get it. But with much of the U.S. Constitution, some of it's so outdated that the original meaning of the Constitution for the founders, what they intended, doesn't apply to the 21st century and 2021 today. I mean, for the main reason why we have the right to bear arms was to protect yourself from the British military back with the Revolutionary War. So, I mean, I get it. It's an American right. But at the same time, why? And I do think that there should be gun laws. I do think that there should be more parameters set in place. But I think it's going to be hard to honestly get there. Because it's just like drugs. You can find somewhere where to get some crack cocaine. Crack cocaine is illegal, but somebody's going to be able to find it. So I'm just like, it's just going to be hard. And I don't know if America's ever going to get to that place where, one, people love the Second Amendment so much that, one, you're infringing on my rights as an American. That's how most people see it. So I don't know if we're ever going to get there, truth be told.
I think it's so interesting what you speak about. Will we ever get there? Because that is kind of the point of this discussion, is to work out what's the appetite for change, if you like, in America. So Hamish, when you look at America and you look at the mass shootings that happen over and over again, what are your thoughts? Are you hopeful? Do you look back and go, well, we look up to America on a lot of different fronts, right? Don't we? But on this issue of firearms, it's one that it often feels for some people that it's almost outdated. America's kind of response to this, the idea that if there's crime, you need to have more guns. So when you hear stuff like that, Hamish, especially from the outside looking in, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I personally think the whole response to saying, "Oh, we need more guns," is a bit of a weird response. Personally, I just find it odd. I mean, my personal opinion is like, I don't personally want to own a gun. But however, if someone wants to own a gun, that's absolutely fine. But just, don't be, free willy and just go around and stuff. But I find my problem with the whole kind of sort of gun control debate in that sense is I feel like there's too many loopholes. And I think we need to fix those loopholes. For example, I find the whole gun show loophole, which allows people to purchase firearms from like a flea market, gun show, online, or any like personal collector without a background check. So in the United States, you can actually, you buy a gun through licensed dealers. However, through that loophole, you can actually buy guns without having that sort of background check. And I also feel like, George pointed on about like, this is a state issue. However, I find we need more like in the United States, we need more national laws in that sense to actually curtail, I find, these mass shootings. In 2019, the El Paso domestic, terrorist incident, which involved, Patrick Cruces, came all the way from Allen, Texas to El Paso, which is, by the way, 650 miles away. Right, so I find on the state level, they have individual rules, and I find on the national level we need to, fix, clear set rules in that place, what we can do in that sense. That's how I feel in this whole debate, really. Okay,
right, Ashton, were you going to say something? Sorry,
I was just going to say it's absolutely the amount that deaths arose through shootings in the US. At one point in 2017, there were 109 people dying per day. That's ridiculous. This map is like showing you between January and March just this year the amount of shootings that have taken place, and at the end of March it was 121 mass shootings, and a mass shooting is defined by I think it's more than 2 people dying in an instant in a particular situation, which I think, I don't know. I'm still struggling to kind of like put that number, given the conversation we've been having recently about COVID deaths and deaths in general and safety of life, put that number alongside this idea of like the amendment or a right to own a gun. Because for me, it's not a right to own a gun, but it's a right to kill somebody. And that's the way that I that's the only way that I can see it.
There's a good point to that. It sounds really strange to say this, but like I've served a lot of time in my military career, and I've lost a lot of friends in the military, mostly to helicopter accidents or motorcycle accidents or stuff like that. I've known 2 people to be killed in a gun-related incident. Neither one was related to anything military. One was wrong place, wrong time during a drive-by shooting. Another one was suicide, but that's a gun-related incident, even though the numbers get skewed on that. But that's the scary truth of it, is like I've been in war zones and I've known more people to be killed by civilian-owned or even illegally owned firearms than in a war zone.
Yeah. Aaron, again, journalist at Common Sense, respond to all the stuff you're hearing. What are you thinking about the UK in comparison to say someone like America on something like this?
I mean, it's a tricky one because the idea of America having the right to bear arms, that's something that's in the Constitution since its inception. To a lot of people, those rights, their right to be able to have a firearm, defend yourself, is non-negotiable. So some people, the idea of any form of gun control in any way, shape, or form is unconstitutional in itself. Personally, I've always been of the opinion that, as crime goes up in certain areas of the UK, maybe it's time for the UK to have its own Second Amendment, in my opinion. I've always found it to be particularly troubling about the idea that the government or any group of people has a monopoly on your own safety. I don't understand why I should have to wait for the police to come and protect me. If I've been shot, for example, the police can't unshoot me, they can't unrob me. Whereas if I have a weapon,
but if you've been shot, then you also can't shoot the other person.
What I'm saying,
that's a misconception because it depends on where you get shot. That's the reason why, going back to the earlier, why people go like, why don't you shoot the injured? Because someone shoots me in my leg, I still have access to all my fingers.
But then what's the point? Tit for tat, then? You're just shooting somebody because they shot you.
No, it's not tit for tat. It's the idea. It's the idea that you have the right to. It's the idea that you have the right to protect yourself.
Given the context in the UK is around knife crime. Okay, using a similar example, do you think then that we should have the right to take knives outside and for each of us to hold a knife in order for protection?
I think the difference between that is how lethal guns are versus knives.
Sure.
With knives, folks have to get in close proximity. They have to attempt to stab you. You can, you can fend yourself, so to speak. And lots of people can reprimand them. You can only stab one person at a time. You can't throw. I mean, unless you can't throw knives at people randomly at will. Whereas with guns,
and you can outrun a knife.
Exactly. However, I love how we've gotten this specific about knives, but guns are different, as we all know. And I take your point, Aaron. I don't think you're alone in saying that. I think there are a number of people who agree with that. Go ahead.
I was going to add really quickly that I was reading a study a few weeks ago, and I found it remarkable that in the States in America, where there is more gun control and more strict laws, the gun-related crimes against people who are not armed skyrocket, whereas the states with less regulated gun laws, the crime drops. So that can't really be a coincidence.
The reason why, because of that, is because you have one state that has gun control and the other state that doesn't have gun control. Because that one state that doesn't have gun control, that one person goes to the other state that has gun control, and that's when it happens. That's why you see mass shootings. I gave the example of El Paso. The guy who traveled 650 miles away to commit mass shooting. That's why you see. Like, I hear this all argument by you lot doing. Okay, not you lot. Sorry, not to make it personal. My bad. Sorry, Aaron. That was bad of me.
You're lucky you're an Arsenal fan.
I know I'm lucky, right? Sorry, but like the thing is, I hear that argument quite a lot. However, we need to remember, if you have state A that doesn't have gun control, and you have another state B that has gun control, one person will travel from state B to state A to do that. That's why you see it.
When we say gun control, there is gun control. What we're debating here is the limit of gun control, or where reform ought to be. Go ahead, George.
So there's a couple different things that are going into both the knife conversation and the gun control thing. There's a lot of strange things because when it comes to the whole idea, especially the name here, common sense people like to say is not a common virtue, but also it's also relative in a lot of ways. So a lot of things that's interesting to say is, yes, Well, the state with the second least gun control has no gun licenses, and that's Vermont, which has a double jeopardy law when it comes to the Second Amendment. It's the only state that says that no gun control can be controlled by anyone less than the state. So the city of Burlington, Vermont, try to ban all guns, but the state of Burlington, Vermont goes like, that's great, you passed that law, but that's unconstitutional under the state law, not just the federal law. So they can't do that. But Vermont has the second least gun violence, and they have basically no laws. They just finally upped the age to own a handgun to 18 a couple of years ago. Like, that is basically Vermont. Vermont has no
what? Up to from what?
16.
It could be
But that-
Hold on, Afshan, you won votes at 16. You won votes at 16.
So
yeah, because a vote does not kill somebody. Sorry, George.
no, but the thing is, it gets a little confusing about this is in my home state of Vermont, which is a lot like Chicago, like in Illinois, where like we have the strongest gun laws out of any state. We have the least gun violence. But the thing that no one ever talks about is education in the United States. Massachusetts has the highest college graduates per capita, second most high school graduates per capita. Vermont has the most high school graduates per capita, second most college graduates per capita. But no one talks about education because when you look at the correspondence, at the same point, it's great that this state has no gun control and this state has gun control, but they're also smart enough to understand what's going on, or they also might be members of the Boy Scouts. Both states have high levels in the military, high levels of hunters. You have access to firearms, understanding like, okay, it's one thing to say these are the laws, but you also have to understand how the laws work. And don't get me wrong, many gun control laws are extremely racist, but if at least you're giving the people education to know how they are racist and how to work around them and basically make sure not to be in. This is a conversation that's not happening in the United States. So the people that are anti-gun control look at Vermont, they have no gun laws, and people that are pro look at Massachusetts and completely ripping out the rest of the conversation. Yeah. And the reason why gun control also gets a little silly, talk about knives, Massachusetts has anti-assault rifle bans, and it's supposed to be against anything that's military grade. But you can have an SKS, which is a Russian semi-automatic rifle. You can have an M1 Grand, which was used in more combat theaters than anywhere else in the world. Perfectly legal because it's wood and not scary. But one of the things that considers new guns, whether or not they're an assault rifle or not, is a pistol grip, which doesn't really affect its rate of fire or shootability, or if it has a bayonet lug, so you can attach a knife to the end of it. The last time we did a bayonet charge was 1951, and they stopped because like machine guns are a thing. So one of the gun control people are putting on there is whether or not you can add a knife to it, which makes no sense.
Let me press you on that, George, a bit. And Siobhan, I'm going to come straight to you as well after this, because one of the changes, if you just hold that thought, Siobhan, one of the changes that folks are purporting that perhaps would be a step in the right direction for America is at least some sort of restrictions on what you just mentioned there, semi-automatic rifles. We know that right now, as of March the 31st, there's been about 126 mass shootings in America, 148 people dead. Now, of course, we know that handguns are, as I think someone's mentioned already, are still the most common weapon type used in shootings, right? However, when it comes to the 6 worst shootings in America, I think someone mentioned Las Vegas in 2017. No, we're seeing semi-automatic rifles being the weapons of choice here. So as reform goes, and I think someone's spoken about it already, on a federal level, as reforms go on a federal level, so this means the whole of America, what reforms would you be for? As someone who is pro-guns, I hate to use that term because it's reductive, I know, but because you're pro-education, as you've said, but would you support a restriction of those semi-automatic rifles? Would you support background checks, more universal, and the closing of these gun show loopholes? What changes do you think can happen and should happen? Because education, unfortunately, has a time lag effect. Educating kids, wait until they're older, 10 years, whatever. But right now, what can be done to curb, quite frankly, these people just like mass dying every day?
I don't think George is talking about education in school, though. You're talking about education in order to get a gun, right? So
I'm speaking both.
Okay.
Both, yeah.
No, and also the first thing is the problem with this whole entire, one of the misconceptions is there really is no such thing as a gun show loophole. Because even if I go to a gun show in Massachusetts, I still have to show my license, fill out all the federal background check, give them my PIN number. You're not doing that. The problem with the gun show loophole is people with FFLs, which are federal firearm licenses, which are commercial gun owner license, not following procedure. Which I think if you're not following procedure, we need to get harsher on the people making sure they're following procedure, because that's how these guns are getting out there. Most guns that end up in illegal hands were bought legally somewhere and someone moved them onto the street. We need to watch over that a lot.
But yes, but you also have to think about there has to be some uniformity across all 50 states as well. Like this gets really confusing. What I just heard you talk about Vermont and Massachusetts was blah 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 because it has nothing to do with me in Illinois or anywhere else. Because honestly, it's so confusing. That's the thing about American government and just American laws in general is you have the state and then you have the federal government. And then if you go 5 or 3 hours, me to Indiana or hour and a half to Missouri, it's completely different laws for different things. If we're going to have true reform, it starts from the top up. It starts from like the federal government.
Well, and I agree. And the main thing that I was going to say is the one problem that kind of confuses me is there's one part of federal government in the United States, which is the NFA, which is the National Federal Firearms Act. They're the ones that we put tax stamps on machine guns. The reason we have tax stamps on suppressors, when you want to get a short-barreled rifle, you have to go through the ATF. The problem is in a lot of ways, and I'm sorry for the pun, have the ATF and NFA have kind of shot themselves in the foot in a lot of weird ways, is the way that they enforce a lot of laws. Like one thing that scares the shit out of me is there are probably about 200 unregistered machine guns in the United States as we speak. And I'm not talking about jack-in-the-box triggers. I'm not talking bump stocks. I'm talking like full-on action Thompson machine guns, MP40s, and stuff like that. But the reason is because you're no longer allowed to register them after 1984. And these are historical items that people, like their grandpa brought back from Korea or World War II or Vietnam, and they don't want to hand them over to the ATF because you can't even donate them to museums. The second you tell the ATF you have it, they'll take it and destroy it the second they find out you have it. So a lot of people get in this weird zone where they're scared that like, oh my God, I have this item where I'm scared to tell the ATF because it's a historical item that they don't want to get destroyed because they are museum pieces. And museums are also the most notorious that if they do get their hands on machine guns, they destroy them by like taking out the firing pin or putting melted lead down the barrel, which you're basically destroying a piece of art if it's a one of a kind. And this is the reason why people get scared and hold on to them. And I'm not saying the people that hold on to them are necessarily bad. What scares the hell out of me is that they don't tell their kids this, they hold on to it. Next thing you know, their grandson goes through grandpa's closet after he dies and here's a full auto machine gun. And now he's like, oh, look what I found. And somehow I'm not saying like the 1 in a billion chance to get that one person that's not the best and be like, okay, I can sell this off for $1,000 in the black market. That's what scares the hell out of me. Where I think the ATF needs to open up the registration because I'd rather have a few hundred more registered where we know there are machine guns out there than how many. I'm even lowballing that's probably about that many unregistered across the thing. And like that's where I agree with the federal needs to get a lot better.
I want to ask a question here because in the UK, we used to have guns. We were a society that, gun proliferation was a thing. However, after Dunblane, things really changed. The public mood changed. The government issued a recall program. Folks handed guns in. Do you think something like that could happen in America where folks, you've spoken there about folks owning machine guns, scared to give it back, so to speak. Do you think we could get to a position in the USA, I'm not talking about in the next 2 weeks or something, but in the future where there's a recall on guns and American citizens give up their guns kind of naturally?
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear the Americans first.
Okay, sorry.
I'll go over to Siobhan. Sorry, I spoke too much. That's on her.
No, you're good. Siobhan, what do you think? We'll come back to you, George.
I was just laughing. You have way too much faith in the American system. Oh my God! Because
exactly, I was about to say something.
It really is so comical to me because sorry if I cut off anybody because no, you have people on both sides of the spectrum that's like, get rid of the guns. And then you also have other people that's like, no, don't take away my guns. But it all really does start at the top. You have to have political parties that find it bipartisan that will agree with that. As long as the Democrats and the Republicans are the top two parties in the American system, no. Long story short, no.
Yeah. So it is important to say. So some may look at it and go, okay, perhaps we're being idealistic here. But it's happened before in many different places around the world where something so shocking happens. And for here, we're talking about Dunblane here. We're talking about I think it's something like 16 young people that were shot and killed. And it was a kind of period of national mourning in the same way where Sandy Hook almost was. I think it really brought people together and said, maybe something needs to change here. Now, maybe we can't imagine that happening, but do you think there could be, a string of mass shootings, whatever it is, that makes people go, something has to give? Like there has to be some sort of nationally mandated change, right? And maybe it starts with background checks, whatever it is. No. What are your thoughts on that, George?
So the problem is that when people look at the United States, I feel like they look at the United States through a UK perspective, where like the UK is technically 4 little nations that are very close together. But the scary thing is all of the UK is still smaller than New England. And New England might even feel very similar in this way. But like I said, Vermont, basically all bets are off on gun control. In Massachusetts, if they could ban them, they pretty much probably would. But the difference is that there is a level of agreement for the most part in those areas. And there are a lot of problems when it comes to federal background checks because it is state. Federal background checks do happen, but most agreements are state. So Massachusetts has the hardest gun control laws. But my license is good nowhere else in the United States because those states get mad at Massachusetts because we don't accept their license because they're not at our level. And you have a lot of conversation like this. The other problem is that, like you asked about semi-autos. I personally don't care to own a semi-auto. I like to collect. I'm actually an Anglophile. I collect SMLEs and Webleys and all British-made firearms because you guys don't make them anymore, which is kind of a problem you guys have right now because you're looking for a new assault rifle, but you can't make your own, so you have to rely on us or Germany. The other situation is that now I'm right now sitting in Alaska for a job. There's no way I'm going hiking in the middle of Alaska without a revolver on me because there's grizzly bear out there, wolverines, wolves. Like, I am prey out here. I'm not predator. This is untamed territory. There's parts of the United States that are still the Wild West.
Don't tell me you've met grizzly bears since you've been in Alaska.
No, but like even when I was running around, like I grew up in Quincy, Massachusetts, and it's not uncommon for you to go run around and have coyotes around you. And you're talking like an area that's been settled for over 300 years with skyscrapers and stuff like that. And you have coy wolves, coyotes. You go up a couple hundred miles north in New Hampshire, there's bear up there. Like, there's bear in Western Massachusetts. Like, that's the reason it's a little bit different, where it's like, if you call the cops, like there's a bear attacking my dog, the cop's going to take 15 or 20 minutes to get to you, but your dog's getting attacked. So go get the double barrel shotgun. Like, that's the conversation that you're having. Like, I completely agree where Siobhan's coming from, because like if living in the city area, there's no point for an assault rifle where I grew up in Massachusetts, unless you're going out and just shooting for practice. Other reasons, if you're part of the military reserve and stuff like that, you should be able to practice as much as you can, because if they need to defend our country, they should be comfortable with their firearm. But there's no need for me to have an assault rifle? No, I actually find M16s boring. That's the reason I collect. If I do buy rifles, they're usually bolt actions because that's all I need. And so I'm going to go out and shoot. But that's my personal opinion. But no, I get where you're coming from. That's the reason I'm on the fence, because I'm on the fence depending on where I'm standing. In Alaska, it makes sense why people need a heavy, powerful rifle, because moose are territorial and they can destroy an F-150 just because they're just angry that you're near them. But if you're in the city and the biggest thing you're fighting is like a New York City rat, which is still kind of scary, like you don't really need a gun.
That's a very interesting perspective on the fact that there are so many different parts of the US that speaking federally makes it difficult. And I guess that is the tension, isn't it? Because you're right. In order to have actual change, it's got to be federal. But the issue is, it's hard to be federal when you've got all these different circumstances in the US, which makes it difficult. UK folks, what are you thinking? I'm looking at Aaron, Afshan, and Hamish.
In the US, you can own a gun if you're on a farm. So there is this understanding that actually when it comes to animals, and I disagree with this personally, but there is an understanding in the UK that when it comes to animals and a safety or a kind of controlling issue, guns can be owned, right, in that instance. But we still have it's still illegal generally across the UK. I don't understand why that can't then be implemented in the US. And I'm hearing from you that there's a safety issue, and I think you're probably in the minority of people because you've come in from a trained background. You actually are educating yourself continually or I hope you are, or what I'm hearing anyway. And you understand nuances around the conversation, but the same people that will go in, like you said before, they get a 2-week background check, as opposed to even a 6-month training, and they still won't do any. They'll still go out and do mass shootings. We're seeing a rise of them over the past couple of years, even though we were in a pandemic and there was a lockdown for some of it in the US. So I'm not quite sure why we can't use a similar model that we have in the UK in the US. I'm struggling with this idea of like taking a life. I'm struggling with this idea of owning a gun and having the control of somebody's life in your hands. Because I don't know, maybe I'm just a pacifist, I guess, in that sense. Then
Go, Hamish, I see you nodding. Are you in agreement here?
Yeah, no, I am sort of in agreement, but I would also say, like, which hasn't really been mentioned in this conversation, which I'm quite surprised by, is the influence of the National Rifle Association, the NRA. They play a huge influence up until we talk about, we need to top down sort of influence. They literally pay. I mean, I'm no conspiracy theorist here, but I feel like they kind of, pay a lot of money towards, Democrats and Republicans. They do play a lot. They do bribe, or maybe bribe, or at least influence the proceedings, which is why we haven't seen much gun reform in that sense, which I think plays a massive role. Of course, I said about the whole state and federal level. I also think the NRA plays a massive role. And I'm not saying like every single member of the NRA wants to hold all guns, have no control at all. But I find the ones up at the top, I think, want to influence proceedings and have absolutely no control in that sense. So I think the NRA plays a huge role.
And it's movies like Purge and series like Purge that like lead us into this idea of like we need to save ourselves and protect ourselves, therefore we need to own guns. Watching the series and watching this idea of like there could be at any moment this idea of people just coming out and shooting around. I want to own I don't want to own a gun, but there is this thought that I'm like, do I need to own a gun? Do I need to have a knife at the house? Or do I need to keep a knife in the kitchen upstairs? There is that thought that goes into it that is like, okay, I need to protect myself, but again, I think it's propaganda.
Well, the good thing is the NRA is on its way out.
Yeah, I was going to say they've been beaten up a lot over the past few years. I mean, they're not in good shape.
The groups that are replacing them, like Pink Pistols, which is the LGBTQ group that founded after the Orlando club shooting. You have Armed Equality. You have the Liberal Gun Club out of Massachusetts. You have the thing is what I'm really liking to see is that you're seeing more people on the left educating themselves, which I think this is what happens. You need to educate yourself on the gun topic on both sides, because what we need is better reform. Because the problem is, like, I don't have an issue with gun control. The problem I have is the gun control that a lot of states are pushing, and this is something I'm happy to see that's going out, is they're making uneducated reform. They're basically, like I said, they're attaching a bayonet lug, making that as part of assault rifle. That makes no point. Like, if you're going to limit round, like, you want to stop assault rifles, don't stop spears that are attached to guns. That doesn't make sense. And that's what I'm happy to see a lot of the time that's going on. Sorry, just kind of lost my train of thought.
No. But I think we understand the point you're making is I mean, as you've been doing from the start, you're flying the flag for education and the fact that if we're better educated, the laws are that we and the policy we draft up is better, and quite frankly, people are more responsible gun owners and gun users too. Aaron, as we close and we think about what you would like to see change in America, or perhaps what you'd like brought here from America, I should say. What are you thinking?
Well, it's. I think the whole basis of the Second Amendment is to basically have the right to protect yourself from threats. I think back to a case that happened a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2018 or 2019, where there was an old man and his wife, a pensioner, and two guys came to rob the house. And unfortunately, the pensioner fought back against the robbers, and one of the robbers died. Now, some people would argue that if he had a gun, that probably wouldn't have it probably would have ended right there. I mean, personally, I've always been of the opinion that once you decide to take someone's life into your own hands, you then have forfeited your right to live as well. In my opinion, I think that once you decide to try to pull out a gun and try to shoot somebody randomly, whatever happens to you next, you have to take. If you can't do the crime, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. But the basic principle of owning a gun is the right to self-preservation, as in you have the right to protect yourself, and no government, no group of people should have more of a right to protect yourself than you. And that's the basic principle. But in this country, we don't seem to have that. The police cannot unrob you. They cannot unshoot you. If you're dead, you're dead. It takes 5 seconds for them to shoot you. How long does it take for the police to come to help us here? 10, 15 minutes for an ambulance? 5, 10 minutes? By then you're already dead. You bled out on the floor.
Yeah, no,
But
I take your point. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Hamish.
No, it's all right. But do you also think, like, I understand your point, Aaron. I think it's a fair point about the self-preservation. I do agree with you that I think, you know, we should have the right to protect ourselves. If that's, you know, as your, you know, the example you gave in terms of like a burglar trying to go into your house and try to steal something and try and harm you, I do personally think as the homeowner, I think you have the right to actually attack the person. And I don't think you should get charged. Personally, that's my personal opinion here. But you say about the whole, like, well, the UK doesn't have the same sort of like idea of like self-preservation and why like we should have, I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth and stuff, but I think the reason is why we don't really have the same sort of like ideas is because of the fact that, you know, we're completely different culture. And you also need to remember, US, the population is like what, 300 million people, and how many police officers are there? Like less than that, like not even the same sort of record. So like, and then the population in the UK is like, you know, less than that, and the officers is a lot more. There's a better ratio in that sense. That's why the US is so like protective of this Second Amendment. It's because the ratio also comes in play of that as well. That's what I would say.
There's that I agree with you to a certain extent, but then I feel like that is basically we're using circumstances to override principle. Does the right for you to does the right to self-preservation trump the right to depend on where you live? And you know, like what you're saying, George, about people in Alaska shooting moose and deer and stuff?
Yeah.
What you
Well, the thing is, like, you need to defend yourself against nature, because nature here will destroy us. We're not the apex predators that we think we are.
Well, I mean, some people are.
So you know, totally hear this, folks. Of course, I don't want to relitigate that because I think that point's been well made. What I was going to say, of course, is, I mean, what's really interesting to me and what we've been hearing from everybody that I think is so important, of course, is the fact that the situation we knew was complicated, but it's obviously more complicated than people instinctively think. You know, because people go, you know, guns or no guns, and you know, should we just ban guns? And you go, well, it's a bit more nuanced than that, isn't it? However, something does have to be done, because I buy the argument about protecting yourself against nature, but most states in the USA, this just isn't a problem. That or that isn't the main problem. Do you know what I mean? You know, it's folks are living in metropolitan bubbles. You know, they're not living where a grizzly bear is going to knock on your door, so to speak, right? So that's something to be aware there. To be aware of there. You know, what are your kind of closing thoughts, Asha, as you take a look at this debate, this conversation? What are you thinking?
I think the only person or entity that has the right to take anybody's life is God, and my mum. That's it.
Right. We're going to end with a sermon.
Say that again?
So we're going to end with a sermon.
We're going to end with a sermon, yeah. But I genuinely think maybe the spiritual side of me, I don't know what, but for me, it's like I live with compassion. That's how I view my world, and that's how I view people. So I still struggle to understand this idea of like the right to take a life, the right to own a gun from that element, from that idea. But I take the points. I take the safety aspects. I take the animal aspects of it. I think there's issues. I think there's other ways around it. But you know, I am for abolition, and I am of the police, as well as you know, the banning of guns worldwide. Not needed.
Worldwide
blanket ban on guns.
I love that perspective.
Let us know what you think, whether you agree or disagree with that, guys, in the comments, because I feel like, you know, it feels like a US conversation, but you know, as we're hearing people in the UK, it does resonate. I think a lot of it resonates with people about rights, and you know, and why don't we own a gun? Why don't we have the right to own a gun as you can do in the US? So those questions do come up quite a lot, I think, for us here.
Definitely. And I think what's been really great about this discussion is to get some different perspectives. I think one of the people who are commenting said it. It's lovely getting different perspectives on one platform and it being civil. You know, we don't have to hate each other, and just, you know, we can see things differently, but we can also explain where we're coming from. I've thoroughly enjoyed the show. I hope listening to this you have as well. If you haven't done so, do hit the subscribe button so you can find out when we have our next debate. There is no doubt this conversation will continue. And I'm hoping this is one of the many conversations we do about guns, about reform, about police, especially in America. And I'm hoping we can get George back. We had another great guest who couldn't